Well, we have one final thing we have to talk about, and that is the removal of Active Directory and removal of domain controllers from an existing domain. It is always a good idea to remove domain controllers using the official procedure as opposed to just ripping them out of the domain. Anytime you go about ripping domain controllers out of a domain without removing the roles and features from those machines, you're going to end up with lingering objects inside of your Active Directory database that could cause problems down the road. So as you can see here, I've brought up the remove roles and features wizard here. If I choose next and then focus it on dc.company.pri, I can choose to unselect Active Directory Domain Services. Now there's two things you have to know. The first of which is sort of obvious, and that is that you can't remove a domain until all the domain controllers have been completely removed from that domain. The second of which is that you can't actually remove Active Directory Domain Services until you go about demoting the domain controller itself. This demotion process goes through removing all those records out of Active Directory in the database itself and so on, and ensuring that you end up with a clean domain after this domain controller gets removed. Now, occasionally you may end up in the situation where you have a domain controller that for one reason or another cannot be cleanly removed from Active Directory. And when that's the case, you may need to go through forcing the removal of the domain controller. And so when that happens, there's a whole variety of extra tasks you'll have to go through that are out of scope for our discussion here. But again, just recognize that the clean removal is your desired state anytime you're getting rid of these DCs out of an Active Directory. And then lastly down here is removing this as the last domain controller in the domain. Anytime you're doing that, this essentially decommissions the domain and takes it out of existence. You'll have some warnings here, some removal options, and even a new administrator password, a local password you'll have to configure. But essentially, this is the process you'll need to go through to get rid of Active Directory off of a specific machine. And then finally, just for completeness, I want to show you over here in PowerShell that there is a PowerShell commandlet you should be aware of too that can accomplish the same thing. It is uninstall ADS domain controller. Just like all the PowerShell commands, there's a long list of just different parameters that will do more or less the same things that we saw back in the graphical user interface. But this is the mechanism from PowerShell that you would go about removing ADDS or removing this domain controller from the domain. And then you would want to go through the remove Windows feature commandlet to go about getting rid of the bits off of this machine as well.